But one of the things we want to start about with is there a place for in your life for absurd schlocky movies, right? And the reason I say that is I've seen a whole host of these like film reviews for some schlock films that came out this year, and they were getting treated with the same level of a review that you might give to Indiana Jones or Mission Impossible 7 or even like a Christopher Nolan drama, right?
Mhm.
And what do you think separates a schlock movie from those kinds of films, like the more tentpole kind of movies, or the more designed with some effort to be good, even if they failed spectacularly in the
Right.
execution, right? Because there's a difference, right, between
Mhm.
say Piranha
Mhm.
and Jaws, as an example.
Right. Right. Snakes on a plane,
Right.
Anaconda.
Hmm.
Uh, I think ultimately there is like a certain level of humor and fourth wall breaking that's it's meta enough that for the standpoint of the film that it's like that as dumb as this is
Uh,
trying to
so
follow
my wife
this.
tells me it's James T. West in Wild Wild West
Yes.
versus James T. Kirk. So you see, yeah. Although his middle name is probably not Tiberius, but anyway.
Right. Yeah. It's been a while. Actually, that's a theme I wouldn't mind returning to at another point. But anyway, so there's just something if you try to rationalize this out as actual events that play out in the world, it's like so absurd you could not really, what's even is the point, except that it at various turns it's funny, or the idea of this sequence of events happening, no matter how ridiculous or unlikely it is, it brings a good deal of humor to it after the fact. And
Mhm.
I think of St. Thomas More, actually. And one of the things that he was engaged in, when he was a page for Cardinal Morton, when he was in the various inns that constitute what we could roughly call law school,
Mhm.
even in his household later, he staged masks and plays of various sorts, and some of them are hilariously bawdy and stupid. He designed and set pieces and
Wait,
wrote
body.
plays.
So in other words, they
Bawdy.
would for a lot of modern traditional Catholics, it would and conservative Catholics, they would be scandalized by this, right?
So let's take 1525. I mean, if Thomas More was on Twitter, let me put it to you this way: if St. Thomas More was on Twitter, I can tell you there would be a lot of 40-something Catholic women that right now profess they love Thomas More. But if he was actually on Twitter, given the double entendres and things from Lucian that he was it's famous for, um, it would, they would be going after him for, I don't know, misogyny, for uh body, is immature.
Wasn't
He's
St.
probably
Thomas
porn
More
brain,
one of the
whatever.
St. Thomas More was one of the saints that famously like described something using modern excretory expletive language,
Oh,
right?
oh yeah. Well, when he went after Luther, for example, after Luther had a profanity laced rant to respond to Henry VIII's book on the Seven Sacraments, Moore showed that he could get down to Luther's level and beat him there. In terms of things, but even see, he really loved like various Greek epigrams from people like Lucian and some other authors that have a lot of double entendres, because he has this certain ambiguity of mind where that, yeah, this is kind of not good, but darn, that's funny, and he can separate the two without and he does that in a lot. He does that in Utopia with the very concepts that are at play. He does that in a number of different, and that's also what made him a good lawyer. It's what made him an excellent lawyer, is the ability to entertain two different things but not be moved by it. So 1525, he's fallen out hard with his son-in-law, who he just discovered with Lutheran books while he was raiding the Steelyard, where a lot of the stuff is infiltrating England, and and they'd had it out over Luther's doctrine, and his son Roper, son-in-law Roper is just not coming along yet. He does later, eventually. And so they need a distraction. So Moore takes a play that he had written, like a mask of sorts that he had written at some time, and he has his household acted out as like a family drama. The play is a woman named Elizabeth who is basically cuckolding masters and going around and playing tricks on people and trying to worm her way in, saying, "Oh, I'm an heiress that's lost all my money or from this, but it'll." Or whatever, I can't remember exactly that nature of the plot. And so she takes a lot of people in, has sex with them, it takes their things and is off. And she tries to do that in the Moore household itself. And so and it has her way with some of the servants, and it's like a joke playing on classic tropes and inside business.
Mhm.
And then you know and then they figure out that she's a fraud, and so
Mhm.
the servants do in Moore's household. So they play her a trick and put laxatives in her food, so that the outhouse practically explodes. So Thomas More himself had a hand in writing this and performing it as a diversion from the very more difficult family business affecting them at Christmas that year,
For
namely
those
his son.
not aware, St. Thomas More is the patron saint of lawyers and like one of the most probably the highest profile martyr for the faith in the English Reformation, right? I mean,
Right.
yeah,
Oh, good.
yeah, like
I
you
don't
could.
have.
That actually sounds like it'd be a funny movie if you made it properly.
Oh, yeah, it would actually, and I've thought about taking some of these quotes and putting them up and just seeing what kind of reaction I get, because if I thought about it, I would have prepared some more.
This
I
is why
mean,
I always
basically,
find.
it tells Luther, "I'm going to rip off your head and S word down your neck."
Right. It's like
Uh,
this is why I always find it like hilarious when people get scandalized when they find out that their, you know, favorite Catholic podcasters they like watching, mainstream movies to some degree or listening to secular popular music or something. I'm like, that stuff's really tame compared to some of the stuff that these saints did in history.
no, precisely, and then there is a certain, because there's a balance, right, between certain uses of language that are considered rude and how it's
Hmm.
employed. And it's not everywhere and in all circumstances a sin to have it make some use of bad language, but it is when, hey, I mean, you cause scandal, go into a room with women from church, and then you
Oh yeah.
drop the F word. Yeah, that's going to be a sin. That's going to cause scandal. On the other hand, there were some friends and it accidentally drops, and you're like, yeah, I should improve my language. You're trying not to. Then there's an occasion where that word actually is the right word to describe the horror of a situation
Hmm.
within the context, and it could be employed that way. And obviously, rude language is best employed in the sparingness that you employ it.
Well, that's
So,
hence why it's so shocking when you see the account of a saint
right.
using it, or when you're reading Dante's Inferno and all of a sudden Dante, the great Catholic poet, is using excretory language to
Mhm,
describe things in the Inferno. It hits really hard. The,
mhm.
the problem you run into, and I see this as lazy writing in a movie. If you're watching a movie and there's a sex scene, I usually think that's just lazy writing on the writer's part, because I've never encountered a scenario in a film where a sex scene is necessary. And I've seen Oppenheimer. I didn't believe Nolan was going to put that stuff in a screen because he was too good of a filmmaker, but he did. I was
He did.
And it didn't
And
need to
why?
be there. Not
It
one
added.
single time in that film did it need to be there. It added 0 to the film because
Right.
there is no scenario where it would add anything to a film. Because in the golden age of Hollywood, when they actually made good films and actually weren't insulting the clergy and blaspheming all the time and trying to corrupt your mind and corrupt minds of young people, they didn't put that stuff in film.
No, indeed. Let's see. So I guess, I mean, that would more or less cover, schlocky movie, something that the actual sequence. I don't know what you think of that definition. That the actual, story of what's going on is utterly absurd. Could never, but
Right. So
the
the Meg
absurdity of
too.
this actually happening and conceiving that actually makes it a bit funny.
So yeah, the example of a schlock film is The Meg is a schlocky film. It's just purposely stupid movie, right? A lot of action movies from the 80s are just schlock. My wife and I's favorite action movie from the 80s is Cobra. Have you ever seen Cobra?
A long time ago,
So do you remember the scene where
totally
Stallone is
recalling.
driving a pickup truck? I think it's a pickup truck. No, yeah, I think it's a pickup truck. He's driving backwards, one-handed, while firing a like an Uzi or something out of the window. Never running out of ammo, by the way.
Of course
Never,
not.
like, on screen, he's fired enough times without having a chance to have reloaded, and he's hitting cars like one shot, blowing them up with this thing. Like, it's absurd. And the
Mhm.
the bad guys in that movie are irredeemably evil, like cartoony, over the top, like satanic cult. Literally, he's going after a satanic cult in the movie. So every time you're watching him dictate these guys out, you're like, huh, well.
Yeah.
Right. Like in the chat, we have Forgotten Hollywood saying what they would show in old Hollywood was the characters in or going into a bedroom, then cut to the next day, week, or etc. Right,
Yeah.
and you knew what was going on.
Mhm.
as opposed to an Oppenheimer where you got like naked
Right.
dialogue scene, which didn't need to be there. You
We're
just didn't need
considering,
to
I
be there.
think we mentioned this with Sound of Freedom,
Mm.
how, of course, a topic you absolutely cannot show in
The
any
evil
way.
thing that movie's about, when it happens in the movie, it happens off screen. They do the old fashioned,
Mhm.
camera trick to, and cinematography trick to show you what's about to happen, to tell you what's about to happen without saying it or showing it, and then they just
Mhm.
cut to after.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
It
absolutely
was all
cannot
the more
talk about that
powerful
topic
for
on
that
YouTube for
too.
some reason.
It was all the more powerful for that too, in that you see, the victim afterward crying and trying to, um, sing a song that she's singing in the beginning, and
Mhm,
that brought the impact for that scene,
mhm.
so much more powerfully, I think, than, if it was an adult and you tried to show that, it would completely take away. There's a sense in which, you build up romance, even, eroticism. When I say eroticism, I don't mean getting people sexually aroused, but I mean there's a certain erotic energy in a movie when you see the chemistry, of various,
'50s movies
players.
were filled with that. Were
They
filled with
were.
that energy.
And when you try to actually visualize the actual act, you basically reduce it to pornography. You've taken all the energy out. Um, and there's of course a lot of double entenders I'm refraining from making at the point, but
Right,
you
well, what
reduce.
they've done is when they often make the excuse they need it for the art form,
Mhm.
when in reality they've actually stripped the art out of it. That those '50s movies were much more artistic in this. But,
Right.
when talking about schlock films, is there a place in the life of a person, seeking a holier life or even a more just virtue-filled life if you don't share religious convictions? Absolutely. And
Mhm.
when judging these movies, when you're watching it, should they be held to the same standard? Like, should a schlocky action movie be held to the same standard as Terminator 2: Judgment Day, which
Right.
is, I think, one of the finest action films ever made,
Mhm.
simply because its underlying message there's an anti-violence message that underlies that whole movie that people who just dismiss every violent movie from Hollywood completely miss out on. Like, the whole subplot is the kid trying to teach this machine that you can't take human life,
Right.
and he can't
Eh,
explain why, but he figures it out towards the end why
mhm.
you can't do it.
Right. And it's really interesting that too. It's just such a well-crafted movie in terms of all the writing, and it's very tight. A lot of Cameron movies are like that, usually because he had grandiose ideas and the studio's telling him no, and that forced him to have to bring it down. I
Mhm.
mean, Aliens actually is a great example where, although I do think that the extended edition is much better than the theatrical version, but there's a movie where he, wasn't even going that long, and by modern movie standards, it'd be a short movie, but the studio's telling him, "No, you bring it down. You need to cut exactly like 8 minutes out of this film." And he's like, "How in the world am I going to do that?" But they finally realized, oh, well, there's a scene that shows the colony before the aliens take it over, and that it covered exactly the amount of time. If you would
Mhm.
take that out, plus a few other, although unfortunately, some of the things they had him take out were really needed for the story, and that's why I think the extended edition is much better for that. But
Yeah, I've seen plenty of extended editions that weren't better. So I'm one of those rare people who will defend Terminator 4, that
really,
it wasn't executed perfectly, but I mean,
mhm.
in comparison to the
You
Terminator movies
mean
that came afterwards, it was a
Salvation, right?
master.
That's
Yeah,
Christian Bale.
when I
Okay,
was a kid, the Terminator movie I wanted was the Future War,
right.
right? And the director's cut of that one has nudity, and it's like, I'm glad they cut it out, drop it to a PG-13.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's by far not a perfect film, but it pales in comparison to Terminator 2. But
Mhm.
the point is, these schlocky kind of films, I like watching those kind of things, like, on occasion, or consuming a lot of just dumb YouTube videos or whatever, at least because of the stuff I do every day on YouTube is, very depressing stuff, honestly.
Yeah.
And there's a place, I think, in life for tuning out of really, like, just the reality of everything at all times. And it is reassuring to hear that St. Thomas More actually was you know, himself a very body playwright. But there's another example of, a figure that is near and dear to my heart who, was known for occasionally writing some really weird stuff, and that is Hilaire Belloc. Are you familiar
Mhm.
with his cautionary
Yes.
tales?
Yes.
His most famous and enduring book. Like it's the
Oh,
one book that has the most strident critics who say some awful
yeah,
things about him.
what is it?
Will
Little Lucy who told many lies, and then and so they go liar, and then the house is on fire, and they're looking at the fire, and they don't believe her, and then she dies.
Right. I mean, the cautionary tales were a satire of like really just cheesy kids books that were being published. And so he wrote one aimed for to make the adults who had to read this stuff to their kids. He wrote one for them to give them a good laugh. And it's it's so the Puritan streak that runs now in Catholic circles, for some reason, they would be mortified if they read this stuff. There's one kid in there who gets eaten by a lion, I think. It's bad. And it's hysterical. And he wrote like 2 or 3 of these while also writing
Right.
these hardcore histories of Christendom books
And Path to
you know,
Rome,
and all these like
other
biting
things like that.
political and economic commentaries and all this like holy, like very sacred poetry. I can't recite poetry to save my life. Otherwise, I would put his poetry up on my YouTube channel because it's beautiful.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic,
Yeah.
and it's it's something we've lost. The whole puritanical streak. It's largely a reaction to the libertinism of our own times, right?
Mhm.
And that there's so much. I mean, sex is everywhere. It is constant. It is impossible to get away from, and from your billboards to everything, and so it creates a reaction. Everything here is bad.